My mother loudly told the pharmacist I was faking my condition for attention and demanded she stop filling my prescriptions. Instead of agreeing, the pharmacist looked at the state database, turned to my mother, and coldly told her to step aside. That was the exact moment my 9 years of inexplicable, agonizing illness unraveled, and I discovered the woman who claimed to be my caretaker was actually my captor. I was leaning against the pharmacy counter with my entire body weight. The edge of the laminate was freezing straight through my sweater, but I had both forearms pressed flat against it. When you have severe seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, standing upright ceases to be a free action. It costs something every single second. Behind the thick security glass, a pharmacist in a crisp white coat over a maroon blouse was scrolling through her monitor. Beside her, a pharmacy tech with a chipped blue fingernail was scanning barcodes. There were 3 people in line behind me. The store speakers were playing some generic acoustic pop song, and a cardboard display of vitamin gummies was sitting slightly crooked on the counter. I remember staring at that display, thinking with perfect clarity that if I could just get back to the passenger seat of my car, I could pretend to be a functioning human being again. Then the automatic sliding doors made that heavy sucking sound, and I heard my mother's unmistakable heavy tread on the linoleum. She had followed me. She was exactly 14 minutes behind me, wearing the heavy wool coat she usually reserved for Sunday service, and she was breathing heavily, a ragged, dramatic panting that was entirely for the benefit of the audience rather than her lungs. She didn't even glance at me. She marched straight past me as if I were a discarded shopping cart left in her path, slammed her heavy leather purse onto the counter ledge right next to my elbow, and spoke. "I'm sorry, but I need to stop you before you dispense anything to her," my mother said. She projected her voice. She said it loudly enough that the elderly man behind me physically took a step back, and the tech with the chipped blue nail stopped scanning completely. "She is faking this condition for attention. She has a psychological issue, and you are enabling it." The pharmacist didn't immediately answer. She didn't gasp, and she didn't look at my mother. She slowly turned her eyes back to her glowing monitor, clicked her mouse 3 times, and then she read. She read the screen for a very long time. It was much longer than anyone normally looks at a profile. It was long enough that my mother irritably said, "Excuse me, did you hear what I said?" And the line behind us shifted uncomfortably. The acoustic pop song faded out, a commercial for allergy meds started playing, and the pharmacist just kept reading, her jaw slowly tightening into a hard, rigid line. I stood there desperately wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. I was 29 years old, and I spent that entire excruciating minute thinking this was the absolute most humiliating thing that had ever happened to me. It took me nearly a week to fully comprehend that I was the only person standing at that counter who didn't know what was actually glowing on that screen. I had been officially sick for 9 years by that point. Unofficially, it had been much longer. Severe autoimmune issues run quietly in the background of your life for years before a doctor finally gives them a name. I spent my late teens as the chronically exhausted girl who always had unexplained joint swelling, the girl who was constantly told she was just seeking sympathy to get out of gym class. The official diagnosis finally came in the autumn of 2016 when I was 20. A kindly rheumatologist had drawn a little diagram of an inflamed joint capsule on the back of a prescription pad, handed it to me, and gently explained that this was a management situation, not a curing situation. I still have that piece of paper. I have kept every single piece of paper any medical professional has ever handed me. It turned out to be the most vital habit I ever accidentally formed. My mother moved me back into her house 3 months after that diagnosis. She was 58, a regional manager for a logistics company, a fiercely organized woman who ironed her bedsheets and cataloged her grocery receipts in a filing cabinet. A year prior, in 2015, she had undergone a complicated spinal surgery that went horribly wrong, costing her almost a year of her life in physical therapy. She talked about that year the way war veterans talk about combat. It fundamentally changed her personality. She became rigid, controlling, and developed a habit of using the phrase "after everything I've been through" as a complete sentence to end any argument. When I moved back in, she took over my medical care immediately. Not gradually, instantly. Within the first 3 weeks, she had my clinic's direct line saved on her phone under a VIP contact, a complex medication schedule color-coded on a whiteboard in the kitchen, and she had permanently allocated all pharmacy runs to herself. She insisted on it. She said I was having too many bad days to drive. When you are 20 years old, terrified of your own failing body, and your knees randomly give out when you try to walk down the hallway, someone forcibly taking the heavy burdens off your plate feels exactly like unconditional love. She bought a massive plastic pill organizer. It had 7 compartments, with the days of the week printed in bold black letters along the top. The letters for Tuesday and Thursday were already half rubbed off when she brought it home. Every single night, at exactly 9 p.m., she would take that organizer into the kitchen, shut the heavy wooden door, and fill it. She claimed she needed total silence because she would lose count of the pills if anyone spoke to her. For 9 years, she filled that plastic box. I never once did it myself. I spent my 20s working from my bed. I got a job transcribing medical dictations for 4 different private clinics and a regional hospital. It is the darkest, most bitter joke of my entire life that I spent 9 years meticulously typing up the medical charts of thousands of strangers while absolutely no one was paying attention to mine. I was incredibly good at my job. I could tell you the exact mood of a surgeon just by the cadence of their voice on the recording. I typed the phrase "patient shows poor response to therapy" tens of thousands of times for faceless strangers. I never once allowed myself to dwell on the fact that those exact same words were sitting in my own medical file, stacking up year after year like dead leaves, because nothing ever worked. Not a single treatment. Not for a month, not for a week. Every time my doctor escalated the dosage, every time we switched to a heavier biologic or a stronger painkiller, I remained exactly where I was, lying on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., biting down on a rolled-up towel so my mother wouldn't hear me sobbing in agony. When you fail every single medical treatment for 9 consecutive years, your medical record stops describing your physical illness and starts describing your moral character. Poor response. Non-adherent. Query possible symptom amplification. Patient reports no benefit despite maximum escalation. I built my entire identity around that damning record. I turned down a massive promotion in 2022 because I couldn't guarantee my employer I'd be able to sit upright in a chair on any given Tuesday. I broke off a 3-year relationship with a wonderful man named Julian, who desperately wanted to take me to his brother's wedding in Italy. I ended it because the sheer guilt of being the anchor dragging him down, the reason a beautiful trip would inevitably get cancelled, was destroying me. I stopped saying yes to anything that required an RSVP. I convinced myself this was maturity. I was untreatable. I had been told so by top-tier professionals, repeatedly, in writing, often in a format I recognized because I typed those exact formats for a living. There were 2 absolute truths I never questioned during those 9 years. The first was that I had not stepped foot inside a pharmacy since 2020. My mother would literally snatch her car keys off the hook before I could even finish asking if my refill was ready. The second was that the plastic pill organizer was the single most sacred object in our house. I was forbidden from touching it when it was empty. I never once stopped to ask myself why a highly capable logistics manager, a woman who could memorize complex shipping manifests, would need a locked door and absolute silence to drop 14 little pills into plastic squares. That Thursday, I ran out of medication completely. I had been 3 days without my pain management supply, and by the 3rd afternoon, my joints felt like someone was systematically driving rusted screws into the bone marrow. My mother casually told me the clinic was dragging their feet on the authorization and that she would sort it out on Monday. I couldn't wait until Monday. I was losing my mind. So, while she was in the shower, I took my spare car keys and drove myself for the first time in nearly 4 years. That is exactly how a crippled, exhausted woman ended up leaning on the freezing laminate of the Ashwood Avenue pharmacy at 4:45 p.m., watching a stranger read a computer screen. The pharmacist's name tag read Times Elena Rostova, PharmD. I learned much later that she had been standing behind pharmacy counters for 15 years. That specific detail matters immensely, because this entire story hinges on the fact that Elena was exactly experienced enough to be legally required to do one tedious administrative task, and exactly stubborn enough to actually do it properly. She was required by state law to check the controlled substance monitoring database before dispensing. Every pharmacist is. But 99% of the time, it's a pure formality, a quick glance at a second monitor, a mindless click, and moving on. It was my mother's loud, aggressive accusation that made Elena open that database and actually read it instead of just glancing. I have replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count. At the time, what I saw was a pharmacist blatantly ignoring my mother, which I instantly interpreted as disgust directed at me. I remember the back of my neck burning. I tried to arrange my facial features into an expression that clearly communicated, "I am so sorry my mother is acting like a lunatic." It's that pathetic. A collaborative look. You give a retail worker when your parent is throwing a tantrum and you desperately want the stranger to know you aren't like them. Elena finally looked up from her monitor. She didn't look at me. She locked eyes with my mother, and her expression was terrifyingly blank. "Ma'am," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave. "I need you to step aside. Move over to the consultation waiting area, now." My mother's chin thrust forward, her face flushing with indignation. "I am her mother. I am her primary caregiver. I have every right to." "I am not asking you to leave the store," Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "I am telling you to step aside." And my mother actually did it. That is the part that still haunts me. My mother, a woman who once screamed at a teenage barista for 10 minutes over the temperature of her latte, took 3 steps to her left and stood rigidly next to a rack of knee braces. She clutched her heavy leather purse with both hands, looking exactly like a child sent to the principal's office. Elena turned to me. She lowered her voice to that specific, hushed pitch medical professionals use when delivering bad news. "Do you use more than one pharmacy?" I shook my head. Confused. No. We've used this exact location for 6 years. Have you ever personally collected a prescription at our Oak Haven branch? I actually let out a dry, rattling laugh. Oak Haven is 45 miles away across 2 county lines. I hadn't driven 45 miles in a single trip since I was 22 years old. No, I said, obviously not. And then I said the words that still make me physically sick with shame. Look, I know how this looks. My mom is just really stressed out with my care. I've been out of my meds for 3 days and I'm in agony. Can you please just fill it? Please. I begged a complete stranger to overlook my mother publicly humiliating me just so I could get my pills and escape the building. Elena looked at me with an expression of profound pity. I am not going to dispense anything to you today. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my boots. I didn't faint. I never faint, but my hands went entirely numb against the cold counter, and a high-pitched ringing started in my ears, like an old television left on in an empty room. I stammered something pathetic about being 3 days deep into withdrawal, and Elena softly said she understood, and she was genuinely sorry. I am going to make a phone call. Elena said quietly, you are welcome to sit in the private consultation room, it's much more comfortable. She turned and walked into the back room. Through the small gap in the shelves, I could see her pick up the heavy landline receiver. She stood with her back to the store the entire time, one hand planted firmly on her hip. I didn't go into the consultation room, I was too paralyzed. I stood there like an absolute idiot while the line of customers behind me dissolved and reformed at the next register. The tech with the chipped blue nail asked me twice if I wanted a glass of water. I couldn't even form the words to answer her. My mother drove us home. The drive took 25 minutes, and she did not speak a single syllable. She kept both hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She didn't turn on the radio. The silence in that car was so heavy it felt suffocating. When we stopped at the massive intersection on Elmcrest, she flicked the turn signal. The rhythmic times tick-tick-tick times of the indicator echoed so loudly in the dead silence of the car that I actually had to press my hand against my ear. I spent that entire drive rationalizing her behavior. I decided she was deeply ashamed. I convinced myself that she had made a massive public scene, been rightfully put in her place by a professional, and was now stewing in the brittle, toxic silence of a proud person who knows they are dead wrong but refuses to apologize. I actually felt a sick wave of pity for her. I mentally drafted the exact sentence I would say, when we got inside, something gentle about how it had been a brutal week for both of us and we should just order takeout and reset. We walked through the front door. She hung her heavy church coat in the hall closet, turned to me with eyes like dead black stones, and said, "You have made my life very difficult today." Then she turned on her heel and walked into the kitchen. At exactly 9 p.m., just like she had done for 3,285 days, she firmly shut the kitchen door. I sat on the living room sofa, staring at the wall. I want you to really process this next detail, because my brain completely failed to process it at the time. There was absolutely nothing to fill that organizer with. The pharmacy had outright refused to dispense the medication. There were no controlled substances anywhere in that house. I had meticulously searched the medical lockbox on the top shelf of the hallway closet 2 nights prior, and it contained nothing but empty blister packs and a single stray cotton ball. Yet, as I sat on the sofa, I heard the distinct sounds coming from behind the kitchen door. I heard the cabinet open. I heard the faint rattling. And I heard the sharp times click, click, click times of 7 little plastic lids being snapped shut, in the exact same rhythmic order she always did it. My exhausted, pain-addled brain simply filed the sound under routine habit and completely ignored the horrific impossibility of it. I lay awake in my bed until 4 a.m. The physical pain was blinding, but the pain was familiar. What was truly tearing me apart was the psychological horror. When you are lying in the dark at 3 a.m., and a licensed pharmacist has just flatly refused to fill your prescription, and your own mother has just announced to a room full of strangers that you are faking your illness, there is only one logical conclusion a broken mind can reach. They can all see something fundamentally wrong with me that I am entirely blind to. I dragged myself out of bed at 4:30 a.m. My knees were screaming with every step. I booted up my laptop, logged into the clinic's secure patient portal, and started typing a message to my doctor. I asked if I had done something wrong. I asked if there was a note in my file that I was unaware of. I read the draft back to myself, and the words sounded exactly like the desperate, manipulative rambling of a drug-seeking addict. So, I deleted it. I wrote a second draft that was just a blanket apology for my existence. I deleted that one, too. I sat in the dark bedroom, listening to the laptop fan whirring, and I thought with absolute, terrifying sincerity, maybe I am the monster they all think I am. Maybe 9 years of failing every single treatment means exactly what the medical charts say it means. That was Thursday night. Update 1. On Monday morning at 10:15 a.m., my phone vibrated on the bathroom counter. The caller ID simply said, Times St. Jude's Rheumatology Clinic. I answered it sitting on the edge of the bathtub, because my joints were so stiff it had taken me an hour just to make it down the hall. Dr. Eris Thorne had been my primary prescribing specialist for 6 of the 9 years. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense man who had been in the specialty for nearly 2 decades. He was the kind of doctor who typed aggressively while he talked to you. He had once told me, in a tone that was entirely clinical and devoid of malice, that I was the most perfectly compliant non-responder he had ever treated. I had always deeply respected him, even though I secretly suspected he had stopped believing my pain levels somewhere around year 4. I just never had the courage to ask him. He skipped the pleasantries entirely. Clara, I need to ask you a very specific question, and I need you to answer it with absolute precision, even if the answer seems ridiculous to you. Have you ever personally signed for a prescription collection at a pharmacy? Of course, I replied, rubbing my swollen wrist. Sometimes. Years ago, before my mobility got bad. How many times, roughly, in the last 24 months? 0, I said instantly. Not once in the last 2 years. My mother collects every single prescription for me. She insists on it. There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear the rapid clacking of his keyboard. I honestly thought I was just caught up in some bureaucratic audit. I genuinely believed that Thursday's mess at the pharmacy had triggered an automatic paperwork review, and I was about to spend 30 minutes helping a receptionist fix a spreadsheet error. I even tried to smooth things over. Dr. Thorne, is this about the incident at the pharmacy last week? Because my mother was incredibly stressed, and I want to apologize for her behavior. Clara, stop. Dr. Thorne's voice was sharper than I had ever heard it. I have just pulled 28 months of your collection records from the state database, along with the digital signature images attached to every single pickup. I am looking at 65 separate dispensing events across 4 different pharmacy branches. One of those branches is out by the industrial park. One is attached to a grocery store in a town I know for a fact you haven't visited in a decade, and one of them is the Oakhaven branch. He paused, letting the geography sink in. Against the 30 prescriptions I have personally written for you in that time frame, 38 of these 65 signatures are in a handwriting that does not match yours. It's not even a forgery. Whoever signed these didn't even try to mimic your signature. He described the handwriting. A heavy, right slanting cursive with a viciously hard downstroke on the letter Y, the exact handwriting that signed my birthday cards. The exact handwriting that had written Times Plumber, 2 p.m. Times on the kitchen whiteboard every day for 9 years. And Clara, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice dropping into a register of pure, controlled anger. 14 of those 38 forged collections fall on dates that I can physically account for you being elsewhere. Because I just spent the last 2 hours, cross-referencing your dispensing log, with your hospital admission log. On November 20th, there was a massive prescription collection signed for at the Oakhaven branch, 45 miles east of your house. Clara, on November 20th, you were sitting in an infusion chair in the outpatient wing of this hospital, 40 miles west of your house. You had a plastic band on your wrist. I have the nurse's observation notes charting your vitals at 5 different times across a 6-hour window. I heard every single word he said, but my brain absolutely refused to assemble them into the correct picture. My mouth just started moving on autopilot. What poured out of me was pure, desperate defense. Dr. Thorne, you don't understand, my mother helps me, I babbled, my voice shaking. She does everything for me. She manages the calendar. She's exhausted. She gave up her entire social life to take care of me. Maybe the pharmacy system has a glitch. Maybe she picked up my refills early to build a buffer for emergencies. She's a hyper-prepared woman. She keeps emergency supplies of everything. The phone was literally slipping out of my grip because my palms had gone ice cold and drenched in sweat. I could hear my own voice desperately defending the woman who was slowly killing me, and I physically could not make myself stop. Dr. Thorne let me ramble until I ran out of breath. Then he said, Clara, I need you to hear the math again. 38 forged signatures. 65 collections on 30 prescriptions. She isn't building a buffer. I swallowed hard. I need to talk to her. I strongly advise against that, he said immediately. I have to talk to her, I repeated, and I hung up the phone. I set the phone down on the cold porcelain of the sink. I sat there for a very long time. And the overriding emotion coursing through my veins wasn't rage. It wasn't betrayal. It was something infinitely darker and more pathetic. It was time's relief. It washed over me like a tidal wave, arriving long before I had given myself permission to feel it. Because if she was stealing them, it meant I wasn't crazy. It meant my body wasn't a broken, untreatable wasteland. I waited until exactly 9 p.m. that night. I wanted to see her do the ritual. I wanted to look her in the eyes while she performed the pantomime. She walked out of the kitchen at 9:06 p.m., holding the large plastic organizer in both hands, and set it down delicately on the hallway credenza where it always lived. I stepped out of the shadows of the living room. Mom, sit down. She froze. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. She didn't sit. She has never, in my entire life, obeyed a command to sit down. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked her about the signatures. I asked her about the sheer volume of pills, and here is the most terrifying part of the entire nightmare: she had the speech completely ready. She wasn't panicked. She didn't stutter. She didn't have to improvise a single syllable. She delivered her excuses the way a veteran actor delivers a monologue they've rehearsed in the mirror for years. She smoothed her skirt, looked me dead in the eye, and began. She said she signed my name because she was the one standing at the counter, and what was she supposed to do? Drag my crippled body out of bed just to make a squiggle on an electronic pad. She said she used the random branch locations because our local pharmacy was constantly running into supply chain issues, and she would absolutely never allow her daughter to go without her medication. She said she collected refills early whenever the system allowed it because Dr. Thorne's clinic was notoriously unreliable with paperwork, and a responsible caregiver always maintains a backup supply, and then she delivered the killing blow. She sighed, a long, martyr sigh, and said, "And darling, you lose things, you drop pills, your memory is foggy from the illness. You know you do. I have to manage the excess because you simply can't be trusted with it." Her speech held up perfectly for exactly 90 seconds. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Every single component of her lie was individually plausible. But stacked together, they formed a house with no doors. I stared at her hands. They were perfectly steady. "Oakhaven," I said quietly. Her fingers twitched. "Just once. 45 miles away. Mom," I continued, my voice gaining traction. "On November 20th. I was in the hospital getting a biologic infusion." What exactly ran out on that specific day that was worth a 90-mile round trip? There is absolutely no version of reality where a dedicated caregiver drives 90 miles to build a buffer. That was the fatal flaw in the architecture of her lie. Every other excuse she made was rooted in convenience. Driving across 2 county lines to a pharmacy where nobody knows your face or your surname is the exact opposite of convenience. It is the calculated action of a criminal avoiding a paper trail. Her face completely transformed. The mask of the loving, exhausted mother didn't just slip, it shattered. Her expression went entirely administrative, like a steel shutter slamming down over a storefront window. She looked at the wall slightly to the left of my head, refusing to make eye contact, and said in a voice devoid of any human warmth, "You don't even use them properly anyway." My chest caved in. The air vanished from my lungs. I looked down at my hands, resting on my knees, and I watched them begin to violently shake. I had a sudden, panic thought: she's going to see my hands shaking, and she's going to use it as proof that I'm having a psychiatric episode. I gave her one final way out. "I want that documented, because for almost a year afterward, I hated myself for being so weak." "Say it," I whispered. "Just admit it out loud, right now, just to me. Tell me the truth, and it stops here. I won't call the clinic. I won't call the pharmacy. We will just figure this out." She looked at me for a long, agonizing moment. Her eyes were completely dead. "After everything I gave up for you," she said. It was a full sentence. There was nothing after it. She picked the plastic organizer up off the credenza, walked back into the kitchen, and firmly shut the door. I stood in the freezing hallway, listening to 7 small plastic lids go times click, click, click times in perfect rhythm, guarding a supply of medication that hadn't existed for years. Update 2. The clinic intervened the very next morning. Dr. Thorne bypassed standard protocols and placed me on a highly supervised, strictly monitored regimen. For the first time in 9 years, I was actually given the correct dosage of my own medication. It was dispensed weekly into a heavy, lockable electronic safe about the size of a toaster. It had a digital timer built into the reinforced lid that I physically could not override, and neither could anyone else. The home care nurse who installed it in my room looked deeply ashamed and apologized profusely for how insulting the device was. I touched the cold metal of the lockbox and told her it was the least insulting object in my entire house. I need to be brutally honest about the next part, because people always assume the most dramatic part of this story is the confrontation. It isn't. The confrontation was just noise. The true horror was the recovery. I honestly didn't believe the medication would work. I had 9 years of hard, empirical evidence proving that my body was a lost cause. I had constructed my entire personality around being a tragic, untreatable medical anomaly. As I sat on my bed watching the little green LED light on the lockbox blink, I mentally prepared myself for another 6 weeks of false hope, after which everyone would finally agree I was broken, and I could go back to rotting in peace. Week 1, I felt nothing but nausea. Week 2, I slept through the night until 6 a.m. without waking up screaming. Week 3, I realized I had been sitting upright at the kitchen table transcribing medical files for 2 uninterrupted hours, and I hadn't thought about my spine a single time. I immediately panicked and told myself it was just a random good patch. Everyone with a chronic illness has good patches. They usually last 3 days, and then the universe viciously collects its debt. Week 5, I walked out the front door and went to the end of the street. It's not a long street. It's exactly 300 yards from my driveway to the battered blue mail collection box on the corner. I just went outside to get some fresh air, and my legs kept moving. I walked all the way to the blue box. My calves burned. But they burned in the completely ordinary, mundane way a healthy body complains about being exercised. It was a pain with a logical beginning and a logical end. It wasn't the blind, mechanical tearing of diseased joints. I stood there on the concrete, resting my hand against the cold metal of the mailbox, and the absolute magnitude of what had been stolen from me crashed down on my shoulders. I collapsed onto the curb outside house number 42, pulled my sweater sleeves over my hands, and sobbed hysterically for half an hour. I wasn't crying from relief. There was zero relief in that moment. Because if the medication worked now, it meant it would have worked all along. Every single year I spent being told by specialists that I was amplifying my symptoms. Every career advancement I rejected. Every trip to Italy I refused to take with the man I loved. Every night I spent writhing on the bathroom tiles, biting a towel so I wouldn't inconvenience the woman sleeping down the hall. None of it was my body failing me. All of it was the direct result of a woman standing in a kitchen at 9 p.m., quietly swallowing my life to feed her own absolute void. The state pharmacy board didn't need my permission to detonate her life. That's the part people get wrong when I tell this story. Elena Rostova, the pharmacist, had filed a massive red flag report that same Thursday afternoon while she was standing in the back room. The digital signature images were instantly transferred from the dispensing system to the state board, and from the state board directly to the county police. The gears of the justice system had started grinding before my mother even turned off the car engine in our driveway. The investigator assigned to the case was Detective Marcus Vance. He had been on the force for 20 years, possessed a perpetually runny nose, and constantly clicked a metal pen while he spoke. He needed a formal statement from me to elevate the charges. Without my testimony, it was just a massive bureaucratic irregularity. With my testimony, it was obtaining a Schedule II controlled substance by systemic fraud, felony identity theft, and dependent adult abuse. He gave me until Friday to come to the precinct. He wasn't threatening me, he was actually very gentle about it. He just had a grand jury on Monday and needed the paperwork filed. On Wednesday evening, my phone rang. It was Brenda, my mother's oldest friend. My mother had been staying in Brenda's spare bedroom ever since I changed the locks on the house. I answered the phone, and I heard my mother screaming in the background. She was in a state of horrific, agonizing chemical withdrawal. The polished, arrogant tone of the logistics manager was completely gone. She sounded like a dying animal. She was begging Brenda to make it stop. I sat on the hardwood floor of my hallway with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the woman who birthed me suffer unimaginable pain, and she begged me for help. Everyone thinks the hardest part of this tragedy is deciding whether or not to send your own mother to prison. It isn't. I would have made that call in a heartbeat purely on principle. The truly agonizing part was knowing that she was actually right about one specific thing. She did times give up her life for me. She moved me into her house and seized control of my schedule because I was the most secure, reliable drug supply a desperate addict could ever legally obtain. But she still spent 9 years cooking my meals, washing my hair when I couldn't lift my arms, and sitting in sterile waiting rooms for hours. Both of those conflicting realities existed at the exact same time, and neither one canceled the other out. Brenda got back on the line. Clara, she is violently ill. What am I supposed to do with her? I looked down the hallway at the credenza. There was a perfectly clean, pale rectangular patch in the dust where the pill organizer had sat for 9 years. Call an ambulance, Brenda, I said quietly, and then lose my number. I hung up the phone. I gave my formal statement to Detective Vance on Thursday morning. He clicked his metal pen exactly 42 times while I laid out a decade of abuse. The true climax of this nightmare didn't happen in a police station, though. It happened a week later, inside Dr. Thorne's office. He turned his massive dual monitors around to face me, displaying 9 years of my own medical charts. Clara, I am going to walk you through this. Dr. Thorne said, his voice heavy with guilt, and I am not going to soften the blow. He went line by agonizing line. 2017, poor response to therapy. 2018, patient reports minimal benefit, query adherence to schedule. 2019, symptom amplification heavily discussed with patient. 2020, escalation of dosage requested by family. Patient remains oddly passive. 2021, drug-seeking behavior noted by mother. I stopped breathing. Noted by mother? Yes, Dr. Thorne said softly, it is in your official chart, in a state hospital database, under your name. He kept reading. 2023. Dose increased at family's urgent request. Patient reports, 0 change. 2024, chronic non-responder. Consider heavy psychological intervention. Dr. Thorne highlighted the text block and struck a red line through 45 separate entries. 9 years of a woman's entire existence being systematically written down wrong. Every single request to escalate your dosage was initiated by your mother, Dr. Thorne said, looking me dead in the eyes. Not a single request came from you. I spent nearly a decade treating a patient I privately described as passive, and I never once stopped to ask myself why the only person in the examination room who never wanted more medication was the person actually suffering from the disease. He formally apologized to me on behalf of his clinic. Then, he took a deep breath and apologized on behalf of the entire medical profession. His voice actually broke when he said it. Thank you, I said. But apologizing doesn't fix the database. There is a permanent file that says I am a drug-seeking addict. Some young doctor 10 years from now is going to open my chart before he even shakes my hand, and the very first thing he will read is the lie my mother planted. Then we will amend it, Dr. Thorne said fiercely. Legally. In writing. So, I wrote the amendment myself. I am a medical transcriptionist. I know exactly what clinical syntax looks like, and I know exactly what language a hospital governance board requires to overwrite history. I spent 3 sleepless nights drafting a 45-point amendment request, cross-referencing every single false entry against the forged pharmacy logs and my hospital admission receipts. The clinical board approved the complete expungement of my record in exactly 14 minutes. It took 9 years to destroy my medical identity, and 14 minutes to hand it back. My mother pleaded guilty to 3 felony counts. She was sentenced to 36 months in state prison, with 18 months suspended pending the completion of a mandatory, highly intensive inpatient rehabilitation program. I also filed for a permanent restraining order, which her public defender didn't even attempt to fight. When the police impounded and searched her car, they found a secondary plastic pill organizer shoved deep inside the trunk, hidden under a winter ice scraper. It was identical to the one in our hallway. The letters for Tuesday and Thursday were rubbed off in the exact same pattern. Next to it was a small, spiral-bound calendar logging every single collection date in a heavy, right slanting cursive with a hard downstroke on the Y. There were 45 entries in that notebook. The exact same number of false entries in my medical chart. I have spent months trying to find some poetic meaning in that coincidence, and I have finally accepted that there isn't one. Evil is just incredibly mundane. Elena Rostova received a formal commendation from the State Pharmacy Board. I know this because she told me herself. I moved into a sunny, ground-floor apartment on the other side of the city in early March. The very first thing I bought for my new kitchen was a heavy lockable dispenser with a digital timer. I absolutely do not need it. There is not a single person in my building who would ever steal from me. But every Sunday night, I leave my kitchen door wide open, I turn the radio up loud, and I fill that box myself. I leave it right in the middle of the island where I can see it. I still use the Ashwood Avenue Pharmacy. It is incredibly out of my way now, but I make the drive every single Thursday. The last time I went in to pick up my now significantly lower dosage, Elena stepped out from behind the bulletproof glass to hand me the paper bag. She asked how I was doing, not the polite retail version of the question, but the real one. I told her I was walking over a mile a day now. Then, I finally asked her the question that had been burning a hole in my chest for nearly a year. Why did you actually check the state database that day? I asked. People pick up controlled substances for their sick relatives all the time. She was a 58-year-old woman in a Sunday church coat. You could have just clicked the override button and filled it. Elena thought about it for a moment. She didn't offer a platitude. She looked at me with the exact same flat, uncompromising expression she had given my mother. Because she said you were doing it for attention. Elena said quietly, nobody says something that cruel about their own child to a complete stranger the very first time. You only say a lie that easily, and that loudly, when you've been using it to get away with murder for years. She pushed the paper bag across the counter. So, I stopped listening to her performance, and I read what was actually on the screen. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.